Dawn mist cloaked horse guards parade. Lance Corporal James Mitchell felt his mount warrior tense beneath the ceremonial saddle, both sensing trouble before it struck. The drunken hooligan thought he was approaching just another parade horse. He never saw the combat veteran behind the gleaming breastplate. Never recognized a horse trained for mountain warfare in Afghanistan. As the yob raised his firecracker, 17 hands of military muscle moved with battlefield precision. Some say you could hear the troublemaker's pride shatter across Whitehall. But what the gasping crowd missed was the real reason Mitchell broke formation. The drunk had a Parachute Regiment tattoo, the same unit marking found on the bomb maker targeting the Queen's birthday parade. This wasn't about disciplining a hooligan. This was about how a decorated cavalry officer and his warhorse had just intercepted a terror cell's test run, using skills earned in combat zones that would never appear in any parade manual. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow, I've got something really special for you. And now, back to the video. Dawn mist cloaked horse guards parade in a shroud of ancient dignity, the same fog that had hidden Wellington's cavalry before Waterloo. Lance Corporal James Mitchell sat astride warrior with the stillness that only combat experience could teach. Both man and horse carried scars beneath their ceremonial finery, earned together in the mountain passes of Helmand Province. Warrior's ears twitched slightly, a movement so subtle tourists would never notice. But to Mitchell, it carried the same warning as it had that day outside Kandahar when they'd spotted the Taliban ambush. Through practiced peripheral vision, Mitchell caught sight of him, a man weaving through the gathering crowd, his measured stumbling too precise to be genuine. Drunkenness, horse guard 3 to control, Mitchell murmured, using the same calm tone that had steadied young troopers under fire. Possible hostile approaching from the east gate. Subject displaying tactical movement patterns. Warriors' muscles tensed. Beneath the ceremonial saddle, the same coiled readiness that had saved their lives in Afghanistan. The massive stallion had earned his place at Horse Guards Parade through blood and valor, chosen for ceremonial duties precisely because he'd proven himself in combat. The drunk approached with carefully orchestrated clumsiness. But Mitchell had seen this choreography before, the way the man's eyes scanned security positions, how his right hand stayed close to his jacket pocket. These weren't the actions of a common hooligan. Then Mitchell saw it, as the man's sleeve rode up, a flash of ink beneath. The Parachute Regiment's winged horse. But not just any unit marking. This particular tattoo carried a specific detail that set Mitchell's combat instincts blazing. The same detail he'd spotted in surveillance photos of the bomb maker targeting next week's birthday parade. Control. Subject displays. Para-regiment tattoo matching target profile Delta. He transmitted. Request confirmation of facial recognition. Through the morning mist came the steady hoofbeats of the relief guard. Sergeant William Harrison, who'd served with Mitchell in Afghanistan, took in the situation with the practiced eye of a veteran cavalryman. Like Mitchell, he'd earned his ceremonial uniform through combat service. The military cross ribbon on his dress uniform spoke to that. The drunk produced what appeared to be a firecracker from his pocket. To tourists, it would look like another fool trying to startle the famous parade horses. But Mitchell had seen similar devices in Afghanistan. Tests to gauge security response times and patterns. What happened next would be remembered in military messes for generations. Warrior, displaying the same precision that had carried Mitchell through firefights, shifted his weight exactly as he'd been trained in counterinsurgency operations. The movement, imperceptible to civilians but clear as cavalry signals to Mitchell, placed 17 hands of battle-hardened muscle between the threat and the crowd. The morning mist seemed to thicken, as if centuries of military tradition were gathering to witness what would follow. The tourists raised their cameras, expecting another amusing show of a drunk testing the famous horse guard's discipline. They had no idea they were about to witness why the household cavalry chose its ceremonial mounts from combat veterans. Why the gleaming breastplates and polished boots weren't just for show. Some traditions, after all, were written in blood long before they were cast in brass. The next 10 seconds demonstrated why the household cavalry still trained for war beneath their ceremonial duties. As the drunk raised his testing device, Warrior and Mitchell moved as one unit, a partnership forged in firefights and honed through countless patrols. Contact imminent, Mitchell transmitted, using the same calm battlefield voice that had guided his troop through Helmand ambushes. Executing Protocol 7. Sergeant Harrison's mount, a battle-scarred bay named Churchill, was already moving to cut off the subject's escape route. The two horses, both veterans of mountain warfare, positioned themselves with the same tactical precision that had once trapped Taliban fighters in narrow valleys. Remember me, Captain. The man's words carried a mockery of drunken slur, but his eyes were combat sharp. Kandahar Province, 2009. Before you fancy cavalry types swooped in to steal our glory. Mitchell did remember. A joint operation that had gone wrong when someone had leaked patrol routes to the enemy. The investigation had never found the source, but now pieces were clicking into place with military precision. Horse Guard 3 to control. He transmitted. Subject confirms battlefield knowledge. Request immediate backup and counter-terrorism. Response. Warrior's ears flicked forward. The same alert movement that had once warned of incoming fire. The horse's combat training showed in every muscle, ready to respond with the same precision that had earned them both battlefield commendations. You parade ground heroes. The man spat, his hand steady despite his seeming drunkenness. Playing at soldiers while real men did the fighting. The irony might have made Mitchell smile, if years of discipline hadn't trained such expressions away. His chest bore shrapnel scars from an IED that Warrior had spotted seconds before detonation. The horse still carried a bullet graze along his flank from the firefight that followed. Through the morning mist came the measured tread of the Metropolitan Police's counter-terrorism unit, their approach carefully obscured by the daily changing of the guard ceremony. But Mitchell knew they might not reach position in time. The drunk was already thumbing what looked like a simple lighter, exactly the kind of innocent-seeming trigger device that had killed 3 of Mitchell's troopers outside Kandahar. What happened next would be studied in military academies for years to come. Warrior, displaying the intuition that had made him legendary in the regiment, executed a classical cavalry maneuver that dated back to the Napoleonic Wars. The movement, refined through centuries of mounted warfare and proven again in modern combat, placed the horse's armored bulk precisely where it needed to be. The tourists' cameras captured what they thought was a magnificent parade horse disciplining a troublemaker. They couldn't know they were witnessing a counter-terrorism operation conducted with ceremonial precision. The culmination of traditions that had evolved from cavalry charges to counterinsurgency. Last chance, soldier, Mitchell said quietly, using the same tone that had once talked down a surrounded Taliban fighter. There are better ways to end this. But in the man's eyes, Mitchell saw only the cold calculation of someone committed to their mission. The same look he'd seen in suicide bombers and hardened insurgents. The morning mist began to thin, revealing the full tableau to gathering spectators. 2 mounted guards, positioned with battlefield precision, containing a threat that most civilians would never recognize. For the household cavalry hadn't survived centuries by being merely ceremonial. Every polished button and gleaming breastplate masked a warrior's readiness. Every parade ground movement contained echoes of battlefield maneuvers. They were about to demonstrate why. What unfolded in the next 30 seconds proved why the household cavalry still trained their ceremonial mounts in battlefield tactics. As the man's finger tightened on the trigger device, Mitchell and Warrior executed a maneuver that had been perfected in the mountain passes of Afghanistan. Cavalry 2, moving to contain. Harrison transmitted, his voice carrying the same steady calm that had guided troops through Taliban ambushes. Churchill, responding to invisible signals learned through countless combat patrols, shifted to complete the tactical formation. The drunk never saw the true significance of their positioning. To tourists' eyes, it appeared as 2 ceremonial guards merely blocking a troublemaker's path. But they had just implemented a classic cavalry containment pattern, updated for modern threats through hard lessons in counterinsurgency. You should have stayed in Afghanistan, the man sneered, his pretense at drunkenness falling away. Left the real soldiering to the paras. Like the day outside Kandahar, Mitchell kept his voice level, buying precious seconds as he saw the counter-terrorism unit moving into position. When someone gave away our patrol routes? Interesting choice of tattoo, by the way. The artist got one detail wrong, just like in the bomb maker's file. A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face, the first genuine emotion he'd shown. His finger tightened on the device, but Warrior was already moving, responding to cues so subtle tourists couldn't see them. The horse's reaction came from years of battlefield experience. The same instincts that had once spotted IEDs now registered the subtle muscle tensions that preceded an attack. As the man's arm began to rise, Warrior executed a classical dressage movement that, in combat zones, had saved countless lives. Contact! Mitchell's warning carried through tactical frequencies as 17 hands of warhorse pivoted with parade ground precision. The motion, beautiful enough to seem ceremonial, had been used by British cavalry since Wellington's day to trap and disarm mounted opponents. Churchill and Harrison completed the maneuver with perfect coordination, boxing in the threat, while maintaining their ceremonial bearing. Not a strap was out of place. Not a button lost its shine, even as they executed a counter-terrorism takedown. The device clattered across cobblestones that had felt the tread of cavalry hooves since George III's time. But it wasn't just history that had disarmed this threat. It was the living tradition of mounted warfare, evolved for modern combat, but rooted in centuries of cavalry excellence. Target contained, Harrison reported as Metropolitan Police moved in. Device secured. Appears to match specifications from the parade threat file. The gathering crowd, still thinking they'd witnessed a drunk being disciplined by parade horses, had no idea they'd just seen the culmination of traditions that stretched from Waterloo to Helmand Province. Every precise movement, every coordinated response, carried echoes of battles fought and lessons learned. You don't understand. The man spat as police led him away. You're just playing at soldiers. No, son. Mitchell replied quietly. Warrior, standing rock steady beneath him. We're maintaining a tradition of active service. These aren't parade decorations. They're battle honors. And today, you've learned why. The morning mist began to clear completely now. Sunlight gleaming off breastplates that had just proven their worth in modern combat. For the household cavalry had demonstrated once again why they chose their ceremonial mounts from war horses. Why their traditions were alive rather than merely preserved. They had shown why some ceremonies weren't just about remembering history. They were about making it. The debriefing took place in a room that embodied the household cavalry's dual nature. Ancient regimental standards hung alongside modern tactical maps. Cavalry sabers shared wall space with counter-terrorism alerts. Colonel Richard Blackwood, 30 years a cavalryman, studied the morning's reports with the same attention he'd once given to battlefield intelligence. The device confirms it, he announced to Mitchell and Harrison, who stood at parade rest before his desk. Exact match to the bomb maker's signature. If he'd succeeded in testing our response patterns, he left the implications unspoken. Next, week's Queen's birthday parade would have been vulnerable. Centuries of tradition turned into a target. Warrior spotted it first, sir. Mitchell reported, military precision in every word. The same tension he used to show before IEDs in Helmand. Churchill backed him up immediately. Harrison nodded in agreement. The horses remembered their combat training, sir. Proved why we still choose our ceremonial mounts from the battlefield string. Through the window came the familiar sounds of the morning guard change. Hooves on cobblestones. Orders crisp in the air. Traditions maintained with perfectionist care. But now the tourists photographing the ceremony couldn't see what the regiment had always known. How each precise movement contained tactical purpose. How every formation could shift from pageantry to combat in a heartbeat. The public sees ceremony, Blackwood mused, touching the cavalry saber on his desk. A weapon that had seen action in 4 wars. They don't understand that we maintain these traditions because they work. Every movement, every position, evolved from battlefield necessity. Mitchell thought of Warrior, now back at his post, gleaming in ceremonial tack that couldn't quite hide the warhorse beneath. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. The regiment's been adapting since Waterloo, sir. From saber charges to counterinsurgency. But the core hasn't changed. Mounted soldiers protecting the crown, whether from Napoleon's cavalry or modern terrorists. Blackwood smiled slightly. Well put, Corporal. That's exactly what I'll be telling the ministry when they ask why we still maintain horse-mounted units in the age of electronic warfare. If I may, sir, Harrison added. Today proved it. No camera system spotted the threat. No electronic sensor caught the trigger device. It took a war horse's instincts and a cavalryman's training. The colonel stood, moving to a map that showed patrol routes around Whitehall. Routes that had evolved from centuries of mounted watchfulness, proven effective through generations of service. The regiment faces both ways, he said quietly. Back to our traditions. Forward to modern threats. Today you men, and your mounts, proved why that balance matters. Through the window, tourists continued photographing the guard change, seeing only the pageantry. They couldn't know that each mounted sentry was a combat veteran. Each ceremonial movement contained tactical purpose. Carry on, gentlemen. Blackwood dismissed them. The Queen's birthday parade still needs protecting. And thanks to you, we know what we're watching for. As Mitchell and Harrison headed back to their posts, the weight of tradition and modern duty rode easily on their shoulders. For the household cavalry had proven once again why their ceremonies weren't mere show. They were preparation. Dawn broke over the household cavalry barracks as Mitchell prepared Warrior for morning exercise. Every brushstroke on the stallion's coat served a dual purpose. Maintaining ceremonial perfection while checking for any signs of stress that might Affect combat readiness. The Queen's birthday parade was 3 days away, and both horse and rider knew their role went far beyond pageantry. He's still alert from yesterday, Mitchell observed to Harrison, who was giving Churchill similar attention. In the next stall, both horses' ears pricked at every unusual sound, their battlefield instincts still heightened after the previous day's incident. Good, Harrison replied, running experienced hands over Churchill's legs. We'll need that awareness. Intelligence suggests our friend wasn't working alone. The morning routine carried echoes of Afghanistan, checking equipment, assessing mounts, preparing for threats that civilians would never notice. But here the tactical gear was disguised by ceremonial splendor. Modern security hidden within ancient tradition. Mounting up in 10 minutes. The stable sergeant's call carried the same authority it had in combat zones. Ceremonial drill followed by tactical exercise. As they led their mounts out into the yard, other members of the regiment were already forming up. Each horse a proven veteran, each rider carrying the dual burden of ceremony and security. Their breastplates gleamed in the early light, polished to a parade standard that somehow never hindered combat effectiveness. The route's been adjusted. Captain James Holdsworth briefed them, his swagger stick pointing to positions on a map that dated from Wellington's time. New formations to account for the threat assessment. Remember, we're not just putting on a show. We're protecting everyone watching it. Mitchell felt warriors shift beneath him, the horse recognizing the tension in his rider's posture. They'd had similar moments in Helmand Province, preparing for mounted patrols through hostile territory. Now the territory was London's ceremonial heart, but the principles remained the same. 3rd Troop, advance. The command rang out, and hooves moved in perfect unison across the parade ground. To observers, it looked like just another practice for the upcoming ceremony. They couldn't see how each position provided optimal surveillance, how every formation could instantly shift from parade ground precision to tactical response. Remarkable, isn't it? Colonel Blackwood had appeared on the reviewing stand, watching his regiment move through maneuvers perfected over centuries. How the old methods still serve modern needs. Each position time-tested since Waterloo, yet perfect for counter-terrorism. The morning sun caught on brass and steel as the troops wheeled and formed, every movement coordinated with military precision. Warrior and Churchill, like all the mounts, performed flawlessly, their combat training making ceremonial drills seem effortless. "They're ready, sir," Captain Holdsworth reported, "both for the parade and anything else." Blackwood nodded, satisfaction evident in his bearing. The regiment's greatest strength has always been this: the ability to maintain perfect ceremony, while being prepared for anything. Our ancestors faced cavalry charges. We face hidden bombs. But the principle remains the same. As the practice continued, tourists began gathering at the gates, cameras ready to capture what they thought was just a rehearsal. They didn't notice how each mounted trooper scanned the crowd with combat-trained eyes, how the horses remained alert for any sign of threat. For the household cavalry wasn't just preparing for a parade. They were maintaining a tradition of vigilance that had protected the crown through centuries of changing threats. Some traditions, after all, never lost their edge. The evening briefing room hummed with tension as Colonel Blackwood spread surveillance photos across the map table. Images from Afghanistan lay beside London street views, a stark reminder of how battlefield experience now protected ceremonial duties. The prisoner talked. Blackwood announced to his gathered officers. The tattoo wasn't just for show. He served with the Paras in Kandahar. Same rotation as our suspected bomb maker. Mitchell studied the photos, recognizing terrain where Warrior had once carried him through firefights. "They were there when the patrol routes leaked, sir. When we lost those men in the ambush." Precisely. Blackwood's finger traced a route on the London map. And now they're planning something similar for the birthday parade, using inside knowledge of our formations, timing our responses. Harrison leaned forward. 30 years of cavalry experience, evident in his bearing. "They're expecting ceremonial troops, sir, not combat veterans who faced their tactics before." The room's walls bore silent witness to the discussion. Regimental battle honors dating back centuries hanging alongside modern tactical displays. Every generation of the household cavalry had faced its own threats, adapted its ancient traditions to new challenges. "We've identified 3 more suspects," Captain Holdsworth reported, placing new photos on the table. "All former military, all with combat experience. They know our procedures because they've served alongside us. But they don't know everything," Mitchell observed quietly. "They've never seen how we integrate ceremonial duty with tactical response. How the horses maintain parade ground precision while staying combat ready. Blackwood nodded approvingly. That's our advantage, gentlemen. Every mount in this regiment is a proven war horse. Every rider a combat veteran. We're not just maintaining ceremony. We're evolving a fighting tradition. Through the window came the evening sounds of the stable yard. Horses being checked, one final time. Age-old routines that hadn't changed since Wellington's day. But now those routines included modern security measures, combat awareness hidden within ceremonial precision. The birthday parade is their target, Blackwood continued. But it's also our chance. They'll be expecting pomp and ceremony to work in their favor. Instead, they'll face cavalry that's fought their kind before. Harrison finished. In the same mountains, against the same tactics. The colonel moved to a framed photograph on the wall. The regiment on parade. Sunlight gleaming off breastplates and drawn sabers. Our ancestors adapted from saber charges to machine guns, from open battle to trench warfare. Now we adapt again. Mounting counter-terrorism operations from horseback. Maintaining tradition while meeting modern threats. Mitchell thought of warrior, standing ready in his stall. A war horse who could switch from ceremonial perfection to combat response in a heartbeat. The perfect symbol of what the regiment had become. Ancient tradition honed to a modern fighting edge. Gentlemen, Blackwood concluded, we have 2 days until the parade. Every trooper, every mount, needs to be ready for both ceremony and combat. These men think they know our weaknesses because they've served in uniform. Let's show them what the household cavalry has always known. That ceremony isn't our weakness, Harrison said firmly. It's our strength. The discipline that makes us perfect on parade makes us deadly in combat. As the officers dispersed to brief their troops, the weight of centuries rode with them. The household cavalry wasn't just preparing to protect a parade. They were preparing to prove why their traditions had survived so long. The midnight check of the stables carried more weight than usual. By lamplight, Mitchell inspected warriors' ceremonial tack one final time. Each strap and buckle checked not just for parade ground shine, but for combat readiness. Tomorrow would test both. Can't sleep either. Harrison's voice came softly from Churchill's stall. The old sergeant was similarly engaged, his practiced hands moving over equipment with the care learned through decades of service. Warriors too alert, Mitchell replied. Same tension he showed before night operations in Helmand. The horses know something's coming. The stable's ancient timbers creaked softly, generations of cavalry mounts having stood watch within these walls. Now their modern successors maintained that vigil. War horses disguised by ceremonial splendor. Fourth stall on the left, Harrison murmured, nodding down the row. That's where my father kept his mount during the 74 parade. Night before the IRA tried their attack. Mitchell knew the story. How the regiment's horses had spotted the bombers before any human security. That same instinct had saved his own life in Afghanistan. Warrior detecting an ambush that electronic sensors had missed. Movement at the gate. A young trooper reported, his whispered warning carrying the proper mix of ceremony and tactical precision. Colonel Blackwood and Captain Holdsworth, with urgent intelligence. The two officers entered carrying folders marked with red priority strips. Their ceremonial uniforms, ready for tomorrow's parade, couldn't quite hide the combat readiness in their bearing. The final piece just came in, Blackwood announced quietly, spreading photos across a hay bale turned tactical desk. MI5 traced our bomb maker's supply chain. The device isn't meant for the parade route itself. They're targeting the assembly area. Holdsworth continued. When the mounted troops are forming up, ceremonial positions at their most vulnerable. Mitchell felt warrior shift in his stall, the horse picking up his rider's tension. In Afghanistan, such moments had preceded combat operations. Now that same awareness would defend centuries of tradition. They think ceremony makes us predictable. Harrison observed, 30 years of mounted service in his voice. That tradition limits our responses. Exactly. Blackwood's finger traced tomorrow's parade route. They're expecting guards on display, not cavalry ready for combat. That's why every mount, every rider, needs to maintain perfect ceremonial bearing while staying alert for threat response. The lamplight caught on brass buttons and polished boots as the officers detailed the intelligence. Above them, the stable's rafters held their own history. Sword cuts from practice sessions. Marks from where nervous horses had once tested their tethers before battle. Pass the word quietly, Blackwood ordered. Every trooper needs to know, but we maintain absolute ceremonial precision. Tomorrow isn't just about protecting a parade. It's about proving why these traditions survived so long. As the officers departed, Mitchell and Harrison exchanged knowing looks. They'd had similar nights in forward operating bases, preparing for operations while maintaining military discipline. "Get some rest, lad," Harrison advised, though he made no move to leave his own mount. "Tomorrow we show them why the household cavalry still trains for war beneath the ceremony." In their stalls, Warrior and Churchill stood alert but controlled. Perfect parade horses to any observer, while their battlefield instincts remained razor-sharp. Like their riders, they embodied the regiment's dual nature: ceremonial splendor, concealing combat readiness. For the household cavalry had always known that some traditions survived precisely because they remained dangerous. Dawn broke over London with deceptive serenity. In the household cavalry barracks, every movement carried the weight of centuries combined with combat readiness. The traditional preparations for a royal parade now concealed careful tactical positioning. "Check your formations," Harrison addressed the assembled troopers, his voice carrying the same authority it had used to brief combat patrols. "Remember, perfect ceremony is our camouflage. Any break in precision will alert them that we're ready." Mitchell worked methodically over Warrior's ceremonial tack, each gleaming buckle and strap checked with battlefield thoroughness. The horse stood perfectly still, but his ears kept moving, tracking sounds with combat-trained awareness. "The bomb maker's signature is distinctive," Colonel Blackwood reminded his officers during the final briefing. "Small devices, easily concealed, but with a unique triggering mechanism. Intelligence suggests they'll attempt placement during the assembly phase." Through the barracks windows came the familiar sounds of London awakening. Tourists already gathering for the parade, unaware that the ceremonial spectacle they awaited doubled as a counter-terrorism operation. "Third troop, mount up!" The command rang across the parade ground with parade ground precision. Every rider took position with textbook ceremonial form that concealed their tactical readiness. "Control to all units," Captain Holdsworth's voice came through their discreet communications. Multiple suspects identified approaching the assembly area. "Maintain absolute ceremonial bearing." Warrior's muscles tensed beneath Mitchell as they moved into formation. The same tension the horse had shown before combat operations in Helmand, now hidden beneath gleaming tack and precise drill movements. "They're watching for any sign we're alert to them," Harrison murmured as their troops aligned with traditional precision. Expecting ceremonial troops focused on display, not combat veterans ready for their tactics. The morning sun caught on breastplates and helmets as the regiment formed up. To observers, it looked like any other royal parade preparation. None could see how each position had been carefully calculated for optimal surveillance and response. "Capability. Movement spotted near the south gate," came the quiet warning through their communications. "Subject matches description of primary target." Mitchell felt Warrior respond to his subtle signals, keeping perfect ceremonial form while positioning for potential action. Around them, other horses and riders did the same. Centuries of cavalry tradition adapted to modern threat response. "Steady, lads," Harrison's calm voice carried to his troops. "Remember your training, both kinds. Show them why the household cavalry never abandoned mounted warfare." Colonel Blackwood, watching from his command position, allowed himself a grim smile. His regiment was proving why ceremonial duties had always required combat veterans, men and horses who could maintain perfect pageantry while ready for instant action. The tourists' cameras flashed, capturing what they thought was just another display of historic pageantry. They couldn't know they were watching a counter-terrorism operation conducted with parade ground precision. For the household cavalry was about to demonstrate that some traditions remained lethal, and the lesson would be taught with both ceremonial splendor and battlefield efficiency. The first sign came exactly as it had in Afghanistan. Warrior's ears suddenly fixing on a point in the crowd. The same alert posture that had once warned of hidden insurgents. Mitchell maintained his ceremonial bearing while his combat senses heightened to full awareness. "Horse Guard 3 to control," he transmitted through their discreet communications. "Warriors showing threat response, Sector 7. Same indicators as Helmand ambush positions." Harrison's Mount Churchill reacted seconds later, the old war horse's battlefield instincts confirming the warning. Through the assembled crowds, practiced eyes caught the subtle movements. Men positioning themselves with military precision poorly disguised as tourist curiosity. Multiple suspects converging. Captain Holdsworth's voice remained parade ground calm. "They're using the crowd's focus on ceremony for cover, just as they did in '74. Colonel Blackwood, watching from his command position, saw the pattern emerging. The bomb maker's team was moving exactly as intelligence had predicted. taking advantage of what they thought was ceremonial predictability. Control, to all units. His orders carried both military authority and historical weight. Execute Protocol Victoria. The name was no accident. The maneuver had been developed after an assassination attempt on Queen Victoria, refined through generations of cavalry experience. To observers, the mounted troops appeared to be performing a standard ceremonial evolution. In reality, they were sliding into perfect counter-terrorism positions. They're moving their devices into position. Harrison observed quietly, his decades of service reading the threats with practiced ease, using ceremonial formations as reference points, just like they did with patrol routes in Kandahar. Warriors' muscles coiled beneath his ceremonial tack. Combat readiness disguised by parade ground. Precision. Around them, other horses showed the same controlled tension. War mounts preparing for action while maintaining perfect ceremony. Two primary suspects approaching from the east. Came the alert through their communications. Carrying modified camera bags, consistent with the bomb maker's signature equipment, Mitchell felt the weight of tradition and tactical necessity balance perfectly as he kept Warrior in formation. The horse responded to signals so subtle tourists couldn't see them, positioning for both ceremony and combat. Steady, lads. Harrison's voice steadied his troops just as it had steadied young soldiers in combat zones. Show them why the household cavalry still trains for war beneath the pageantry. The morning sun gleamed off breastplates and helmets as the regiment maintained its ceremonial bearing. Each position had been calculated to appear purely traditional, while providing optimal response capability. Through the crowd came the bomb maker himself, his movements carrying the same military precision that had once made him a valued ally. Now that precision would be his undoing. Every step taking him exactly where the regiment's centuries of experience had predicted. All units prepare to execute, Blackwood ordered, watching his regiment prove why ceremonial duties required combat. Veterans, on my signal. The tourists continued filming what they thought was historic pageantry, unaware they were about to witness why the household cavalry had survived centuries of active service. For some traditions weren't just preserved, they were kept sharp. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Colonel Blackwood's command, Execute Protocol Victoria, transformed ceremonial precision into combat action with a smoothness that proved why the household cavalry never truly left the battlefield. Warrior moved first, his battlefield instincts responding to signals so subtle tourists couldn't see them. The war horse's pivot, appearing to onlookers as merely perfect ceremonial drill, placed 17 hands of trained muscle exactly where tactical necessity required. Mitchell maintained his parade ground bearing even as his combat senses guided the movement. Horse Guard 3, engaging primary target, he transmitted, his voice carrying the same calm it had during firefights in Helmand. Around him, the regiment's formations shifted like a perfectly choreographed dance, each movement masking tactical purpose beneath ceremonial splendor. Harrison and Churchill led the secondary response, decades of cavalry experience flowing into action. The old sergeant's voice steadied his troops just as it had steadied young soldiers under fire. Maintain ceremony through contact. Show them why we still train for war. The bomb maker never saw the true significance of the regiment's movements. To his combat-trained eyes, the mounted troops appeared to be performing traditional evolutions. He couldn't know that centuries of cavalry tradition had prepared for exactly this moment. Target is contained, Captain Holdsworth reported as the trap closed. The regiment's formations had shifted to cut off every escape route, using maneuvers that dated back to Wellington's time, but served perfectly in modern combat. Metropolitan Police counter-terrorism units moved in with precision, their response coordinated through generations of joint training with the household cavalry. The bomb maker's team found themselves caught in a net of horse and rider pairs, each positioned with parade ground precision that doubled as tactical efficiency. Like Malaysia all over again, Mitchell murmured to Warrior as the horse maintained his position with battlefield steadiness. The stallion's ears flicked in recognition, both of them remembering similar operations in different terrain. Through it all, not a button was out of place, not a strap had shifted. The regiment maintained absolute ceremonial standards even as they executed a counter-terrorism operation. Tourists continued filming what they thought was just an impressive display of horsemanship. 6 suspects in custody. Came the confirmation through their communications. All devices secured. No ceremonial compromise. Colonel Blackwood allowed himself a moment of pride as he watched his regiment prove why their traditions had survived so long. Every horse and rider had demonstrated the perfect balance of pageantry and combat effectiveness. that had kept the household cavalry relevant through centuries of changing warfare. "Stand down from tactical response," he ordered. "Resume parade positions." The transition back to pure ceremony was as smooth as the shift to combat had been. To observers, it appeared the regiment had simply completed another complex display of traditional horsemanship. None could know they had just witnessed the culmination of traditions that stretched from Waterloo to modern counterterrorism. Harrison's voice carried quiet satisfaction as he addressed his troops. "Well done, lads. Your ancestors would be proud." As the regiment resumed its ceremonial duties, Mitchell felt warrior relax beneath him, the same way the horse had relaxed after successful combat operations. Both of them knew they had just participated in something that went beyond mere ceremony or modern warfare. They had demonstrated why the household cavalry maintained its mounted traditions in an age of electronic warfare, why they chose their ceremonial horses from combat veterans, their riders from soldiers proven in battle. For some traditions weren't just about remembering history, they were about making it. And as the sun reached its zenith over London, gleaming off breastplates that had just proved their worth in modern combat, the household cavalry had shown once again why their ceremonies weren't mere pageantry. They were proof that some traditions never lost their edge. Colonel Blackwood's final words to his officers captured it perfectly. "Gentlemen, today you've upheld both sides of our heritage, the ceremonial perfection that honors our history, and the combat effectiveness that ensures our future." For in the end, that was what the household cavalry had always been. The perfect fusion of tradition and tactical necessity, ceremony and combat readiness, past glory and present purpose. Some called them living history, but they were actually history still being written, with every precision movement, every perfect formation, every moment when ceremony proved its worth in modern warfare. The tourists went home with photographs of what they thought was just impressive pageantry. They couldn't know they had witnessed why some traditions remained deadly, and why the household cavalry would always be more than just ceremonial troops.